so we're going to talk about Drupal 8. I'm wired up pretty heavily here, so I guess resistance is futile, or Drupal 8 resistance is futile. There we go. All right, so let's get started here. So Drupal 8, why you'll think it's awesome. First thing I want to ask is, has anybody played with Drupal 8 at all yet? Good, quite a few hands. Who has no idea about Drupal 8 or what's coming up or anything like that? All right, a few more hands. Nice. All right, so here we go. So I am Chris Luckhardt. I'm from Canada, Toronto to be specific. I'm a longtime advocate of open source software, Drupal obviously being one of those things, Firefox, MySQL, all sorts of stuff for a long, long time. I started working with Drupal since Drupal 6 was released, February 2008. That's when I decided to end the .NET Nuke nightmare and jump into Drupal. Drupal has its own ups and downs and fun stuff, so we'll talk about some of that. I'm the lead organizer of the Toronto Drupal User Group. We've been around since the dawn of time, it seems like about 2006, 5 or something like that. Our founder was actually at the very first DrupalCon, which was basically like 5 guys in a circle at OSCon in Vancouver, I think, or something like that. So we go back a long way. I am also the lead organizer of our Drupal Camp Toronto events and also the upcoming Drupal North 2015 event, which I'll talk about a bit later. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but I want to mention it. And you can find out more about me at my Drupal.org user profile, which leads us to this page. So I tend to specialize in site building, system architecture, design, theming front end, content strategy, and I'm doing a lot of project management these days. And yeah, I've been working with Drupal for almost 7 years. I was recently had the honor of being featured by the Drupal Association as their Drupal Master persona. If you're not familiar with their persona series, I highly recommend checking it out. It's really good. It shows a general overall profile of what's happening with Drupal.org, how it's being crafted, I guess we'll say, and the different personas that are being targeted there. I've been talking a lot about Drupal 8 because I really like what's coming up with it, and I've been doing a lot of traveling doing that. And apart from all that, I'm actually really into photography, even more than Dries in his DrupalCon Austin presentations. And I've been fortunate to be featured in a number of places for my abandoned places photography. And what I've done in this presentation, I've kind of rejigged it a little bit so that it will showcase a few local highlights, and you'll see what those are. And I also like learning language in Japanese and different things and love guitars, but anyway, enough about me. So yeah, I mentioned abandoned photography. I'll maybe mention a couple of the places in the slideshow, but this is the Lee Plaza Hotel, the ballroom in there, and you'll see a few highlights of Detroit and the area as we roll along here. So, but on with Drupal 8. So Drupal 8, the first branch of Drupal 8 was created at DrupalCon Chicago in March of 2011 by Dries, and basically what that means is he created the branch and then no work was really done for about 6 months, and then things really got rolling. But he talked about at DrupalCon Chicago, he talked about several elements of Drupal 8 and what he wanted to do, what he wanted to see the project do, and how it would be worked on. And all of that was at kind of a higher level. So there were really 4 key goals that he talked about. Improving the user experience. There were a couple of studies that talked about the user experience for Drupal 6 and Drupal 7, how things could change, how things could be improved, and that sort of thing. So he mentioned that. Separation of content and configuration. If you've worked with staging systems and complex sites, you know just how difficult it is to deal with configuration and content, and getting those separated was one of the key goals. Web services integration. So at that time, actually this ties into multi-device capability too, but at that time getting Drupal sites working on these things and other kinds of devices was not the easiest thing to do. So the project was divided into 6 initiatives, and the reason for that is that Drupal has grown so much over the years. It's become big, and lots of lines of code, lots of components and different bits and pieces that are happening there. So it made sense to break it into smaller chunks, and those chunks are If you're good at math, you'll see that there's actually more than 6, and I'll mention why in a second. But the basics of the initiatives were configuration management, web services, design, multilingual, HTML5, and mobile. And there was also an initiative called blocks and layouts, and it proved to be too ambitious. So I put Drupal 9 up there on the screen, but really, there's talk about maybe a point release, but it's a big chunk, so probably Drupal 9 is the safe bet on what will happen there. So I could talk about each initiative individually, but what I would prefer to do is to talk about the users that Drupal is being targeted towards. So, so those particular users are the content authors and mobile platforms. It's kind of a little different, but they're sort of one and the same. Site builders, designers and themers, and developers. And I'm going to talk about content authors first, because really the people who are using Drupal the most are not the developers, the designers, and site builders, but the people who are actually putting content in the content management system itself. And if their experience is not great, they will complain, and they will talk to the people who are paying our salaries and paying our fees and all that sort of thing. And it's good to make sure they have a great experience. And there's been a lot of work done in that area. So first of all, content authors and mobile platforms. Right. So Spark, the Packard plant in Detroit, there's always a fire going on at any given day that ends in Y. That seems to be the joke amongst urban explorers and photographers. So Spark is an initiative that was created to essentially improve the authoring experience, add a WYSIWYG into Drupal, set up inline editing, and also just an overall revision of the content creation page. So what I'm going to do is be bold and do a live demonstration using Simply Test Me. Has anybody seen the site before? Okay, nods, great. So if you pick Drupal core, it's at beta 6 right now. My screen's a little hard to see here, but it's going to do an installation. So one thing that, from a marketing perspective for Drupal 8 is often, we're all using command line tools, more or less, and often what you'll be doing in a meeting of some kind, talking to CTOs, CIOs, marketing specialists or whatnot, is you'll be showing them an installation screen so they can kind of see what's happening in terms of the interface and that sort of thing. So this will give you a quick chance to have a walkthrough and see what's going on. And it is essentially the same as Drupal 7, but there are some obvious visual improvements, some other UX style improvements, some language. So I'll just go through this really quick. And simplytest.me, if you don't know, they give you about 30 minutes per installation. So odds are I'll probably have to spin up another one as we work through this. So Drupal 8 is big. It's bigger than Drupal 7. Just naturally, that's how these projects evolve. There's a lot of moving parts and that sort of thing. There are modules that are now built into core, and there are some things that were thrown out, like blog, etc. But as you can see on the screen there, there's a bunch of stuff installing. Views. It's a prelude to some things I'm going to talk about in a second. So conveniently, simply test.me fills in all of the details for us, and boom, we have a Drupal 8 site. So there's some things that are obviously different right off the bat. The admin menu. This is all built in Drupal 8. I can't see my mouse on that screen, so I'll look down here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create just a simple page. And can everyone read that okay? Oh yeah, you've got the TVs up there, I forgot. So
maybe turn the lights on.
Never works. Can someone help with the light switches? Sorry for the audio guys in the clap. I should have, yeah. Oh, then I'd be closer to that one. Okay, great. How's that? That's good? All right, great. Okay, so as you can see, some UI components are different. Rounded buttons, for example, that sort of thing. But it is quite a bit different. So I'll click Add Content. And still, article and basic page are there. So I'm going to create a basic page. All right. So the first thing you'll notice is the authoring experience is completely different, but kind of the same. Some elements have been moved and switched around so you can see everything on the same screen without having to do any scrolling. Obviously, these sort of meta information for the post were down below the editor in, or I should say the blank content authoring box, if you want to call it that, in the text area in Drupal 7. But now it's shifted over to the right. And of course, this is for the desktop display. I'll show you some mobile examples in a second. But there's a built-in WYSIWYG, which is obviously a big change. You can still go in and customize these things if you want, but we have a default installation for some of these things now, which is great. So what I'll do is I'll create some content. And I like to tell people, if you aren't Riker Ipsuming, you're Ipsuming wrong. So, and I'm sure everyone knows who that guy is, right? All right. You're not serious, right? There you go. Whether it's a joke or not is for you to decide. All right, so I've got some content there. It's just basic text. Some things, I'll bold some stuff. I mean, I don't really need to show this. We all know how WYSIWYG editors work and that sort of thing. We'll click image. I don't have an image ready to load in, but you can see there's built-in image editing and that sort of thing. Image importing, inserting. Oh, is this where it's going to crash? It's thinking. I've never had a problem at this point so far. The very first time I did this back in April, bang. I was actually demoing this in Japan at their first Drupal camp, and I clicked the content link here, white screen of death. The content management system died at the content page. Perfect. It's a good thing they didn't understand English. Actually, they do. Anyway, that's another story. So some other quick improvements you'll see here. It says save as and published or save as unpublished. Usually, I don't know about you, but I'll go in and customize some of these things to make it more user-friendly for the authoring admins, and et cetera, et cetera. So I'll just click save and publish, and there it is. Now, I'm going to go back. I missed one thing I wanted to show. Did I click that? Yep. No. Right, so it is the default WYSIWYG, but you have the different options here, restricted, basic, and full HTML. Because I've got content in there, it'll give me a warning about changing the formatting. But then you get an enhanced toolbar up here. So, things that you basically would expect. So I will just save and keep published.
Well, where's PHP filter?
See that door? Yeah, gone. It's gone. Okay, so that's a quick run through of the editing screen, the WYSIWYG, and now I'll show you inline editing. So if you can see that on your screens, if I hover here, there's a little pencil style icon that shows up, and I'll click it, click Quick Edit, and up comes this little editor style hover. I can edit the title to shut up, Wesley. Did someone start to clap? Poor Will Wheaton. Okay, shut up, Wesley. And also, I can edit in the text area here too. To Crusher. There you go, Pulaski, Crusher. Nobody liked Pulaski, right? Okay. Okay, so there we go. So that's just an example of inline editing. Right, so revised content creation page, inline editing, built-in WYSIWYG, and an overall improvement in the authoring experience. Good? Bad? Ugly? Awesome? Awesome? All right. So if you're not a Drupal user, you're coming into Drupal new, it's the first time you see this, you're not going to be horrified that there's no way to do bolding text or adding images or just the overall experience. I do have a slide for this. So that's those 4 points. And then I have a screenshot in there for people who want to check out the slides later. So now the other thing is mobile platforms, which ties into this as well. I'll show some more examples. That was shot in the St. Agnes Catholic School. That's actually iPad 1, I guess, but anyway. So another abandoned place in Detroit. Beautiful, beautiful school to photograph even now. Sorry. So responsive design out of the box, which basically means everything comes out mobile. You can do mobile administration, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll show some examples of that. And really what I mean is, I'll just go back to edit, and with Firefox Developer Preview, and click the toolbar, click responsive design view, and it jumps to the responsive design view. I'll get the menu out of the way. And wow, that's really small up there. Can everyone see that okay on the TVs? All right. So you get a view of what it looks like in the mobile editing environment. So there's nothing extra. This is Drupal core, Drupal 8 core. So I don't know, I'll take off the exclamation. Change a word. Scroll. Imagine I'm swiping. You know, you can click and hover over different things. You can change some stuff here. You can make aliases, menus, all the sort of standard stuff we're used to. Save and keep published. I'll save and unpublish it, just because we're going to be different here. And there you go. Oops. Hamburger menus. So here are, I'll just quickly run through some of this. This will be a preview of some slides that are coming up, but actually this is a good one. So if you can read it, it says extend. What do you think extend actually is? Bingo. Nomenclature has been changed in the UI. So we know what a module is, but if someone's coming to Drupal for the first time and they're getting into it, they're learning it, they see extend. Okay, well that makes sense. I remember back in the day with Firefox, it was called extensions. Now it's changed. It's been changed for years to add-ons. So it's just some of the simple language that's built into Drupal that is helpful in terms of full UI experience and UX experience. Another thing too, I know I'm sure all of us add in the modules so we can filter and sort like this. It's built into the interface now. What's something I can do? Translation. Yeah, so it's pretty slick in terms of site building. Anyway, so that's a little taste of what happens in mobile. I'll show a little bit more as we move through this, but you can see things are moving and expanding depending on the different viewport that you've got going on. That would be like iPad, tablet kind of thing, back to phone style. So what do you think of that? Good? Cool. All right. Okay. So mobile friendly. There's a screenshot of some stuff going on there too for mobile. So the next group I want to talk about is site builders. And there are a couple of key elements I'll focus on. One thing I want to say too, in Drupal 8, there's over 200 changes that have happened. There's a lot to go through in a high-level overview like what I'm doing here, so I'm just picking out some key concepts, some key segments of the project. So Views is now in core. That's a view off of Michigan Central Station looking down at downtown Detroit. Amazing view. Kind of hard to get up there now, but pretty awesome view. So Views is in core. Can anybody tell me why that's a good thing? All right.
Because all of your lists in core are going to be views that you can edit.
Oh, very true, very true. Also, one critical thing in terms of the project's development overall is I'm sure some of us will remember Drupal 7 came out in January 2011. So did anybody release a Drupal 7 project in 2011? All right. What kind of project? How complex?
Pretty complex.
Okay.
Learning platform, it has entities, views, maybe the thing on.
You're the one guy that raised your hand, so there you go. But generally speaking, we had to wait until Views was out of beta release, that it had a stable release, because so much of what Drupal does, especially 2011, especially now, is dependent on Views being functional. I can't think of a Drupal site I built ever that didn't have some kind of view happening in it or something that was related to that. So with Views in core, my prediction is that we won't have to wait 6 to 9 months to start doing production sites, except if we're that one guy who's brave enough and crazy enough to do it. Maybe upon release we could do simple production sites, or maybe 3 months later. Um,
to wait 6 or 9 more months for a 4 to come out.
Well, we'll see what happens, yeah. I hinted that later too. But yeah, so Views is built into core now, which is great. And obviously that was sort of the quote-unquote easiest initiative to complete. It was done first because Views is Views and just need to be hooked into Drupal 8. That makes it sound really simple, but it was the first one there. So and it's essentially functional. So I'll show some demonstrations of Views in core so you can see what's going on there. So here it is, and much like the gentleman over here mentioned, lists of things are happening in Views. So for example, our user list, we would, we'd bring that up as we normally would, but it's now a view, and it's changed to be people, and I can actually go and edit it if I want. I don't recommend this, but there's a case for everything, I suppose. But you can kind of see what's happening here, and I'll show you what it looks like on. Actually, I'll show you mobile in a second. So it's a typical view. Click something, up comes the configurations for it, and so on. So I'll close that. I should probably be clicking cancel. Just give it a second. Got 16 minutes left on my install. All right. This isn't awkward at all. All right. There we go. Okay, so I'll show you what it looks like on mobile. I'll just drag the browser. Do it that way. So, it's one thing to look at all the sort of standard content pages for administration and what those look like on a mobile experience, but Views is obviously complex, and what that looks like on mobile is a good indication of what the administration interface can do in a mobile environment. So here's what it looks like. And if I click one of these again, up comes the modal dialog. And I'll click cancel this time, because that should work in theory. Beta 6, everyone. Yeah. Nothing has white screen on me yet, which is good. And it didn't actually cancel anything. Oh, there we go. All right. Okay. So that's Views in core. Couple of screenshots there in the slides. So the next one for site builders is configuration management, and that's an abandoned church in Detroit. Figure 8, configuration of stuff in the place. Anyway, I was trying. Tie in with Drupal 8 somehow. All right. So yeah, so configuration management. So configuration was moved out of the database, except now it's not in the, moved out of the database. It was moved back into the database. I think it was somewhere around April. For the lifespan of the project to that point, they had moved configuration out of the database and into the file system using YAML files. It's a human readable XML format. Just a quick explanation of that. And what they were doing was moving it out of the database and into the file system for the purposes of source control, so that you can take the configuration, split it out from the content, and be able to move things from your development to your testing to your live environment, and move the configuration around like that, which was a good idea, except they changed that for a couple of considerations. The speed of dealing with the file system versus the database, initial installation speed for demonstration purposes and that sort of thing. There's also security considerations for having that information in the file system. My personal opinion on that is, if you've got issues with your file system security, you've got bigger problems to deal with than just some YAML files sitting there. But anyway, that's how things have happened. You can still move that configuration information into the file system, which is where I would prefer it to be, so I can do that source control and revisioning and that sort of thing like that. So that's basically what's happening there. So the thing I like to ask people is, have you lost 100 hours of sleep working with features? Raise your hand. Yeah, okay. And the rest of you are liars. So, we did this with features. We're doing this with features. I shouldn't talk in past tense. And what the features module ended up being was something that it was never originally intended to be. It's moving complex sites and configuration and other elements of a Drupal installation throughout your staging environments. And someone once said, "Oh, it works like 89.2% of the time." They said, "Well, you're way more successful than I am." So this is meant to eliminate or deal with that issue. And maybe a greater issue too that I should mention is that the way I see it is Drupal 8 is standardizing a lot of the things that we're doing in Drupal 7. And the benefit of that obviously is the standardization. Everyone's going to be doing the same kind of procedures and patterns and so on with your configuration, your theming, and your back-end development and that sort of thing. One of the things I tell people, the power of Drupal is that it can do anything, and one of the problems with Drupal is it can do anything. And there's several different ways of doing, front-end theming, and you can use panels, you can use context, and et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of the standardization is meant to indirectly deal with that. So anyway, that's an example of how that works with configuration management. And I'll show an example of that in a second, but this is kind of the idea behind how the slide system, the file system management would work. So a simple example of configuration management would be toggling the checkbox for JavaScript aggregation. So if you toggle that on and off, within the YAML file, it would change the state from true to false. And I'm guilty of this, and there was some discussion about how this was a bad thing, but in my early demos of this system, I was actually going into the file and editing it myself, and you're really not supposed to do that. It's supposed to be handled within the file system and with Drupal handling all of that stuff. But it was for demonstration purposes, so I guess it kind of worked out. So what I'll do is I'll show a very brief example of how this works. Any questions so far?
So you just said that you aren't supposed to go in to the file and change the file. But I thought the whole idea of moving configuration out of the database and into code was so that it was versionable. And that is, de facto, you're changing the code if you revert version.
Yeah, so if you're in a development environment, let's say, and you're clicking around, I consider point and click stuff to be site building. That's a very loose definition of it. But if you're in there and you toggle performance for JavaScript on and off, then that's changing it in the files themselves. So the basic idea is they don't want you to be editing those files in the file system. You've got that curious face going, yeah.
Well,
these are the YAML configuration files.
Yeah.
Keep in mind. Yeah.
And I understand it's like Symfony. Symfony does its config in YAML.
Yeah, yeah.
But if you switch branches on a Git repo, and those two YAML files are different, I mean, that is de facto editing the YAML file. I don't understand the...
Yes, sir?
So one of the things that Chris briefly touched on was the difference between active and staging. So you have two configuration stores. And so what you're supposed to do is on your, and these dots and deadlines, so give you a quick tip.
Yeah.
You get the configuration management interface. You're going to, when you've done that point and click, the development environment, you can export to the files, and then you're going to drop that into the staging folder of your live site. And or Git manager.
Sure.
And then when we'll pick it up from the staging and put it in active configuration. Before April, active configuration was stored on disk. Oh, now it's in cache. Oh.
I'll show you a very quick example of that right now, actually. So, how much time do I have on this? 8 minutes. Okay, I can get through this piece in 8 minutes. So configuration management. So actually first I want to, I'll do a single export. And I'm going to export a article content type. So I'm just going to copy and paste the code. I don't know if you can see that very well, but for example, article, name, the type, description. Revisioning is not currently turned on in that content type, so it's listed as false. If I went in and clicked it and turned it on, it would be listed as true. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that code, and I'm going to go to the content type and delete article. Now just remember, normally I wouldn't do this, but this is for a demonstration purpose. I've done this with 2 separate installs going at once, but and I've used trydrupal8.com, and it crashed out on me, so I just said I'll just simulate the whole concept of it. Okay, so I've deleted the article content type, and previously to that I copied the code to do the export of the configuration. So I'll go back into configuration, and I'm basically going to recreate it. So ignore some errors. Okay, so I'm going to do an import of a single content type, paste in the code, and import. So just imagine this is another site. Like maybe it's your test site and I copied something out of the development site. So there you go. Article was imported. I'll go back to structure, go back to content types, and there it is. So that's one piece of configuration, very simple. Essentially mirroring it or pretending to mirror it in another site, but it's in the same site, but it's just for demonstration purposes. And if you saw in that screen, there is single import and export and full import and export. So the question always comes up, well, how do you deal with stuff in between? Well, that's where features comes back into play, doing what it was originally intended to do in the first place. Maybe a little bit more enhanced too, but features will still exist for Drupal 8, and there's a lot of activity going on with that. I don't really have a lot of time to show that right now, but this gives you a very quick demonstration of what happens with configuration management. So do you have answers to your questions? Did that make any sense? Okay, great. Awesome. Okay, so the next one is multilingual. That's the Packard plant. She's Japanese, so hence the time with multilingual. My friend from Japan came over and we did some exploring together in the Packard plant. But the reason why it's relevant in terms of Japanese is there's been talk about expanding Drupal outside, not preaching to the choir, expanding outside, getting off the island, all the terms that you may have heard. And one of those is reaching out into foreign markets like Asia, which is very dependent, obviously, on multilingual capability in Drupal. So that's something that Drupal 8 is really trying to solve and deal with, is making that whole system easier and smoother to create multilingual websites. In Canada, it's important, especially in Ontario, because Quebec is there and they've got their Quebec brand of French, and then there's obviously France French, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, and maybe you saw the news. Dries was in China and Japan back in September, and I've been personally doing a bit of work with the Japanese Drupal community and helping them with some translation things and information about Drupal 8 and so on. So anyway, there's your tie-in with Japan, I guess. Right, so if I go into the extend section of Drupal 8, not modules, but extend, you'll see these elements in the interface. And I think I'll just go in and show some live demonstrations of that. How much time do I have on this install? 3 minutes. All right, well, I'll show you where it is. So this is all Drupal 8 core by default. So I'll just check these and click Save Config. So now, while that's working, I'm going to spin up another simply test to me. So just ignore this for a quick second. That's going to launch me another site. Goodbye, Riker. Okay. It's frozen. Okay, interesting. So I'll go back into configuration quickly. Oh, there we go. Just do the install really quick. Did I unclick it? Oh, sorry. going to time out. I'll just leave it then. It'd be great if they did 1 hour so I could do a full presentation. I could do a local copy, but it's kind of cheating in a way.
Just tweet that at Patrick D, and he'll probably do it.
Thank you. Ask and you shall receive, right? There's no harm in asking. Okay. All right, there we go. Back into extend. Sorry about that slight delay. Okay. So now check the 4 modules that are in there by default. And what I'll do is I'll just walk through these really quickly. So languages. So English is in there by default because that's what I chose for installation. But you can install Japanese, for example, by default if you want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a language. And I'm sure you can guess which one I'm going to pick. Grab Japanese. So what it does is it's going to go out and fetch the installation. The language file, sorry. And there it is. And yeah, it's not grabbing all the interface translation. Anyway, I had this bug last time I tried this. It's a beta 6 thing, I think. Okay. So anyway, I just went and selected Japanese, and it theoretically went out and grabbed the translation file. So now if I click through translations, content, I'll pick content, I'll pick basic page, and I'll click save, and there's all the different fields, etc., that you can select for translation. Okay. Go back one. Interface translation. Okay, I'll just do that. So I'm going to go to content. Got to recreate some content. Basic page. So now you can see by default it's picking English or Japanese, or I have those available to select. So I'm going to do hello, hello, save and publish. So that's English by default. Okay, now I'll go to Translate tab, add, and that's konnichiwa in Japanese. I'm sure you've all at least heard that one word. All right. Save and keep published this translation. There we go. Oops. So now you can see 2 sets of content right there. That's with default Drupal 8. No additional contrib or anything like that. All right. All right. So the next thing, that's just another screenshot of the multilingual options in Extend.
And so those,
yes.
those 2 entities were linked. So if that was deleted or edited, they would both disappear, right?
The original translation English is there.
Node,
yeah.
Even though it's not a node, correct?
Yeah, they get linked together.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you add another language, et cetera, and you keep adding to it, you know, it's all there. There's a lot happening behind the scenes. I'm giving like a really high level overview, so you're kind of seeing just the surface of what can happen with all this stuff. But yeah, things are linked together. Again, like I was saying, a lot of the work that we were doing and are doing in Drupal 7, I keep talking past tense, is standardizing the things that we were doing to make translations happen, for example, right? So our multilingual sites. So that's essentially what you're seeing there. Yep.
Is there a particular suite of modules that this, the language stuff's been modeled after?
Well, again, I'm kind of repeating myself, but it's basically modeled after what's happening in Drupal 7. That's all. One thing, I'll show a couple links later, but Gabor, the multilingual initiative lead, he's got a big a series of posts talking about what's happening with the initiative and how it's being put together and built. I'll show the link after. You'll see what's going on there. But it's worth a read. He gets into real good detail about what's happening and how it's all working and the whole process and everything else. So, all right. So, yeah, designers and themers. Okay, so there are several elements that we'll approach there. I don't really have something to show for HTML5 and Twig, but libraries, books, etc. So there's a metaphor there. That's again in the St. Agatha Catholic School. Lots of amazing books that are unfortunately sitting there like that. Right. So in terms of designers and themers, as you saw on the previous screen, so HTML5, all theme and core components are producing HTML5 markup. There's a new templating language called Twig. That's a Symfony import. I can talk about that in a second. New front-end libraries, and this is the most accessible version of Drupal ever. That's maybe more marketing lingo than anything real, but it is more accessible. Accessibility laws and things change and morph all the time. In Ontario, we have very strict accessibility laws that we have to follow. I don't know what it is here in Michigan, but Drupal 8 is targeting that as well. So. But in terms of Twig and some HTML5 I can show you, don't know how easy that code is to see on the screen, but this is what Twig looks like. And it's a very simple example, but something for example, like the user picture. This is how you do it in Twig. Anything you see with double curly braces is Twig. And probably the first thing you'll notice in there is there's no PHP code. So that helps with security. It helps with speed in compiling what's happening on the front end. And there's some HTML tags in this example, article for example, down in there. But you can see where some code-like things are happening, control structures like if, end if, etc. It kind of shows you a glimpse of what Twig looks like. There's lots of amazing documentation on Twig. It's not really difficult to pick up if you're into doing front-end stuff. And in terms of, I mentioned security, it's great. So people aren't writing PHP code within their template files, and that kind of speaks back to the whole where's PHP in the system. So how am I doing for time here? Whoops. Wow, time flies when I'm talking about Drupal 8. All right. So I'm going to talk about developers. And what's new for developers. I don't really have an image that works for development so much because we're talking about states of decay, except there are so many lines and things going off into the distance here. There's a lot of stuff happening for development in Drupal 8. So, for example, Symfony 2 components, object-oriented programming, YAML, improved APIs, PHP unit testing, migration tools, and web services. And there's a lot more going on. I'll show a few things in the next screens. But yeah, so Symfony 2, it's a PHP library platform. Is anybody familiar with it? Has anybody worked with things that work with Symfony, for example? Okay, a few hands. All right. So back when Dries gave his keynote at DrupalCon Chicago in 2011, there was this whole talk of getting off the island. That's become the sort of go-to phrase, and reaching out beyond the Drupal community and looking for other libraries and components and things we can work with that are already doing things really well. Symfony 2, I'll list some components on the next slide, but there's a lot going on there. And basically what that brings to the table, maybe the most important thing, I think, is object-oriented programming. So I don't know about the rest of you, but for me, I came from a .NET world. I started getting back into PHP after doing that before the .NET stuff, and working with procedural code just kind of didn't really do it for me. I ended up doing front-end stuff and site building and the other stuff I mentioned earlier. And this has got me excited about programming with Drupal 8 now, again, and getting back into the possibilities that object-oriented programming provide and just the logic and everything behind that. So that's exciting. YAML, again, that's the markup language that's happening in the background, the human readable format. Improved APIs I talked about. PHP unit testing, simple testing for your code. What a lot of us are doing now is suites of testing using things like Selenium Builder, Travis CI. I built a system recently that worked with those tools and doing really comprehensive testing, but there's some simple tools built into Drupal 8 to do that. Migration I'll talk about in a second. That's kind of a touchy area. Web services I've already hinted at a little bit, but that's essentially being able to spit content and elements out of Drupal 8 in a very standardized fashion so that it can talk to other platforms. So Symfony 2 components. Now, I'm not going to pretend to be a Symfony expert because I'm not really working with this stuff, but there's a few items up here. Some of you may be familiar with these things and what they're doing and so on, but there's numerous elements, and a lot of them are somewhat self-explanatory, like validator and translation. They work with validation and translation, of course. Twig is the front-end language I was talking about earlier for doing your front-end work, YAML, etc. Routing, class loaders, HTTP kernel, and other elements like that. That's all for processing your code and what Drupal's doing in the back end there. So there's a lot going on in terms of that, and we'll move on to the concept of better APIs. So this is just a small list of what's happening with the APIs in Drupal 8. So there's configuration API, plugin API, block API, cache, entity, form. Some things that exist in 7, some new things. There's lots of talk. People are always asking about state API and what's happening there. Tour API, so there's tour interface elements built in, so you can create a tour and walk through some elements and stuff. It's great for marketing purposes. Menu, migrate, serialization, et cetera, et cetera. So tons of stuff happening in terms of APIs. You can go to the Drupal 8 API page and you'll see a massive list of stuff, and you can read through the documentation, which is growing. There's a lot more to go, but it's growing rapidly. So migration is always an interesting topic because who has migrated a Drupal 6 site to Drupal 7? Okay. So again, you've probably lost up to 100 hours or more of sleep on that, yeah? And the rest of you are also lying again. So typically what I've done, what I've heard is done, is we don't really try to migrate a site. We'll basically build a new site and then pull the content in, feeds, whatever, right? It's the least headache-oriented way of doing it. And really, it's the way to do it. It's simpler. And usually what happens is, by the time a company might come to you and say, well, we need a new site, we want to build something, you're basically working with a whole different design anyway, maybe different branding even. So it gives you a chance to do something brand new, and then you can just pull in the content. I can't recall ever actually just migrating a site, period, like that. So in terms of what's happening with Drupal 8 and migration, there's a lot going on, and they're trying to target Drupal 6 sites for migration to Drupal 8. They're doing work for 7. But really, they're targeting the 6 to 8 migration path, because getting all those sites off of 6, because it's going to come to end of life, etc., is a smart move to do. But and there are tools built into Drupal 8 to do that. But thank you. So Metal Toad recently put up a really nice series of migrating content, taxonomy, users, nodes, etc., from 7 to 8, and the simple answer is, there's nothing really there yet to do it. There's nothing you can just click and start dragging stuff around or importing files or whatever. But they go through a process of doing that, and I've got 10 minutes left, so I'm not going to actually walk through that. But those links are there. They'll be put, maybe I'll go and edit the presentation page, and you can, I seriously recommend checking that out. They go into building modules to do this, and building a configuration to make this happen and so on, and it runs off of Drush with command line tools and so on, so it's actually pretty slick, but and it's fresh too. It's only maybe a month or two old, so the information is still relevant. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump to the big question: when is Drupal 8 ready? So I don't know if you like praying. I'm not a religious man, but I kind of got a tie-in for that image. That's again the St. Agnes Church, beautiful old building that's unfortunately crumbling pretty rapidly these days. So Drupal 8 will be released eventually. And the thing that Dries always says is it's ready when it's ready, which is really when it's got 0 critical issues, that's when we can start looking at a full release. So one thing I'd like to point out in this chart is 100 is the total here, and this is July of 2013. And you can see this line is kind of, doesn't really drop much. But there's good news. This is the latest update to that graph, and you can see this number is really starting to drop. This was somewhere close to 150 at one point, like 125, and now it's down at 66, I think. Yeah, 66. I'll show you a screen in a second, but again, we can see rapid progress is happening. And one of the ways that we can help, the question is, how can we get Drupal 8 out the door faster? Or better and faster, smarter, all those important things. Not just like, let's get it out and have bugs in it, but how can we do it the best possible way? So there's a page on Drupal.org that talks about how to get involved. And really what they're saying is help to build Drupal 8, get involved in the issue queue, whether that's in sprints that we did recently. I don't know if did you guys do a group sprint during the sprint weekend, January 17th, 18th? That's a strong no. Okay, so over 50 user groups around the world got together. Most of it was like 10 or less people. There were a few, like in India, they had 50 people in a place or whatever. It was crazy. But there was a lot of work done on, I think it was 400 plus issues got dealt with in one form or another. And really, that's part of helping to build Drupal 8, doing group sprints, getting in the issue queue on your own, and so on. I'll talk about Drupal 8 Accelerate in a second, but the last one is obviously help to promote Drupal 8, which is sort of, I guess, what I'm doing here, talking about Drupal 8 and getting the news out and awareness about what's happening there. So recently, the Drupal Association created the Drupal 8 Accelerate Fund. Has anybody heard of that? All right, cool, a couple of hands. So long story short, they created a fund that will help you get paid to actually work on Drupal 8 issues. So that's a good idea, right? I think the fund is $125,000, and so you're not going to be able to say, I want to write some documentation and get some funding. It's got to be a real serious set of issues, like the critical issues that were shown up there. There's 66 of them or something like that. And the funds will be, I guess they're still working out how that's exactly going to work, but they're trying to distribute the funds very wisely, and it won't be like, here's $5,000 to work on an issue. It will be, here's a little seed money to see if it's going to be something worthwhile working on, and you can do it. I think it's $500 or so, $500, 5 hours, to give you a chance to see if you can actually tackle this issue. And in theory, this will help to accelerate the release of Drupal 8, hence the name Drupal 8 Accelerate. I'm just going to quickly bring up this link here. So they talk about the three things I just mentioned. I'm going to scroll up here, and yeah, 66 critical issues are remaining. So it's dropping rapidly, thanks to the sprints that I mentioned and the other details there. This page has more information about how you can get involved to help speed up the release of Drupal 8, promotion and building Drupal 8, Accelerate, et cetera, getting into the issue queues and that sort of thing too. So 5 minutes? Okay, so I'm almost done. There's one other thing I want to mention before I close it up, and this is a slight digression, but it's targeted towards Drupal 8 in a certain respect. And then maybe we can do some quick Q&A, but as well as thanking the organizers of this event, I just want to make a very brief announcement about Drupal North 2015. It's a regional conference that we're doing in first year. It's happening in Toronto. It's coming up June 25th to 28th. You can think of it like a bad camp or a nice camp north of the border. And we have a Twitter account, so if you want to check it out, you can follow that. We don't have a full website up yet, but it's coming soon. And the cities listed in the bottom, those are the regional cities that are working on this. And our friends from Western New York are also involved because they come up to Toronto a lot to our meetups and so on. But it's meant to be a huge conference. Those dates and the venue are confirmed already, and we would love it if you would come up and come to the conference and participate, present, anything like that. There'll be more information on that coming up on Twitter. So we will be focusing on building a Drupal 8 conference website that is multilingual because of the French-English thing that we have to deal with up in Canada. So anyway, so a little info on that, but that's all I have to say about Drupal 8 and the Drupal North thing. So you can find out more about me at my Drupal.org profile and also the Drupal Association's Personas series that they did too. So there's a lot to talk about in Drupal 8. I breezed over a lot of stuff, but hopefully that was a good primer on what's going on there. So if we have a few questions or anything like that, please fire away. Yes?
And in Drupal 8, do we have search capabilities on the menu page?
Search capability on the menu page? Actually, I don't know.
Like you had for view.
I can't give you a definitive answer. I don't know for sure. Sorry. Anybody else know the answer? Yeah, if anybody knows any answer that I'm missing, please go ahead. Yeah. Okay, sorry. Next.
Yeah, I was just curious about the file system in Drupal 8.
Yeah.
Are you going to have to use like IMC still, or?
Sorry, can you say the last part?
The file system.
Yeah, file system. So the file system, the structure of Drupal 8 is quite a bit different.
No, I'm talking about in the WYSIWYG.
Oh,
You know,
IMCA.
okay, yeah. So all that is built in by default. If I still have,
do we have to pick like an image from a library for the user?
I think that's trim. And then the media module.
Yeah.
The media module and the other one.
it's crashing it.
Another media initiative, trim. Provides voices for this, the lead, and the other container.
Sorry, I got a beach ball going here, but yeah. So I kind of heard some of what was discussed there, but yeah. So I was just talking to one of the contributors of the media module, and there's a lot of work being done on it, but nothing's really ready yet. But yeah, things will be standardized and set up by default. Yeah. I think I saw a hand over here. Yeah.
Is the overlay done?
Gone. Nuked. Yeah. Yeah, no overlay, no blog. There's a few other modules that are gone by default. But yeah, overlay was axed pretty early on. Yeah. Yep.
Where's Ryerson University geographically?
Downtown Toronto. Aim for the center and you'll hit it. Yeah, it's a big university right in the core of Toronto. There's lots of parking. You could, throw a rock and hit 50 restaurants, and it's a pretty awesome location. Yeah, so we really hope everyone will come. Yes.
Is the API fixed for developers, or we have to wait for the RC release?
Is the API? Like a frozen? Yeah. They froze all development a year ago or so now. I think. Yeah. Forgive me, I forget the date, but yeah, core development's been frozen for.
So country model can migrate without worrying about having to make changes later, right?
Mostly, yeah. There's always room for things to shift and change, just because it is, they're trying to stabilize it in the beta cycle and so on. But yeah, like core elements of it are fixed. Yeah, yeah.
They've adopted something new in the development process because of Drupal 8 core development process. So right now there's when we're evaluating issues or when seeing whether they're critical or not, or whether they should be committed or not critical, there's now a flow chart to see where it is. So API changes are frozen. It's still possible that there could be API changes until I think the string freeze, which is the release candidate. I can't recall off the top of my head, but it's possible that there could be some minor API changes.
Yeah. So it's still a bit of a moving target is really the answer. One thing I did forget to mention too is, so if you go to this page, that date actually changed 3 times today. It said March of 2016 this morning, and it said May of 2016 last night. Now it's down to November 17. So it's not a real number, but it gives you some indication of what's happening. My personal guess is a DrupalCon is when it will be released. And there will be a lot of work done to probably make that happen, but I could be wrong, but I could be right too. You never know. But the magnitude of the critical issue that's being worked on might take a month or it might take a day, and that would drastically affect the median, I guess, if that's the correct math on it. So things could morph and change, but it's kind of hovering around 9 months to a year from now. I think that's fair. Yeah. So be prepared to party in a year. Yeah. Any other questions, or are we good? Okay, cool. Thank you, everyone.